She had no date, no friends at the wedding. Then the groom's millionaire friend sat beside her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Today's story is titled, She Had No Date, No Friends at the Wedding. Then the groom's millionaire friend sat beside her. Now, let us go back to our main character. The ballroom glowed under strings of amber lights. Laughter rippled across tables dressed in white linen, champagne glasses clinked, and the band played a soft jazz version of Can't Help Falling in Love. Every seat was filled except for one. At table 23, near the service door, Grace Turner sat alone, clutching her folded napkin like it could make her invisible. Her name card read Grace Turner plus guest. The plus guest was printed by mistake. There was no guest. Her plus one had always been a fantasy, the kind that vanishes when real life sends another rent notice. She wore a gold thrift store dress whose seams she had restitched the night before. The hem brushed her ankles, and the shoes pinched her toes. Grace tried to smile when waiters passed, but the laughter from nearby tables sounded like a language she did not speak. She worked part-time at a bookstore and barely made enough to pay for groceries, let alone gifts for the newlyweds. The only reason she had come was because the bride had said, "It would mean so much if you came. There will be plenty of people your age." But there were not. She reached for her old film camera resting beside her plate, pretending to check the lens just to keep her hands busy. Her reflection shimmered in the silver fork mascara already smudged, lips pressed thin. She whispered to herself, "You can get through 2 more hours. Just smile and disappear when the dancing starts." Then the door beside her opened, letting in a draft of cool air and the scent of rain. A man stepped in, tall, his tuxedo slightly wrinkled, hair damp as if he had run through the parking lot. In his hand was a small gift box wrapped in navy paper. His eyes scanned the crowded room, searching for an empty seat. Their eyes met for half a second before she quickly looked away. The stranger walked toward her table, pausing beside the only empty chair. "Is anyone sitting here?" he asked. Grace blinked, surprised that anyone was asking. She gestured awkwardly at the chair. "No, it is all yours. Unless you are the caterer, then I think you are lost." He chuckled softly, setting the gift box down. "I will risk it." His name was Mason Reed. That was all he said. No title, no mention of what he did for a living. His tie was loosened, his cufflink missing, and yet his calm made the noise around them fade a little. Grace, nervous, started talking just to fill the silence. "I guess we are the leftovers, table 23, right by the kitchen. Perfect spot for an introvert like me." Mason smiled. "Then I am in the right place." The hum of the party continued, clinking glasses, a toast echoing from the main table, but at the edge of it all, the two of them sat in a small pocket of quiet. Grace could feel her heartbeat slow for the first time that night. She did not know who he was, or that sitting down beside her would change everything. But for now, for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Grace woke up the next morning with the faint smell of roses still clinging to her hair. The wedding was over, but her mind replayed the moment that stranger had sat beside her. Mason Reed, the name echoed softly, as if it had weight she did not understand yet. She remembered his calm voice, the small smile, when she had joked about their unlucky table by the kitchen. The city outside her window was already awake. The distant hum of buses, a siren cutting through morning air. The sound of neighbors arguing about trash bins. It was all so ordinary after the golden glow of last night. Grace pulled on her gray sweater and stared at the stack of bills on her table. Her paycheck from the bookstore was barely enough to cover rent, and her landlord had left a red notice on the door again. She made herself a cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt toast. As she stirred it, she found the wedding place card tucked inside her purse, Grace Turner plus guest. She smiled bitterly. "Still plus none," she murmured. For some reason, she could not throw it away. Beside the card lay her old film camera. She had taken only one picture that night. Out of habit, she reached for the roll, holding it up to the window. The frame counter showed 1 exposure left. She smiled faintly. "Maybe the universe is saving me one more moment," she whispered. At noon, Grace walked to the bookstore where she worked part-time. It smelled like paper and dust, a comfort she knew too well. Her manager, Mr. Gordon, greeted her with his usual distracted wave. "Grace, we are cutting the afternoon shift today. Sales are slow." She nodded quietly. That meant another $20 gone. During her lunch break, she sat outside the store, eating a half sandwich wrapped in napkin. Her phone buzzed once an email from a stranger. Subject line, Seat 23. Her heart skipped. She opened it. "Hi Grace, this is Mason Reed. I wanted to thank you again for letting me share your table. You made an awkward night feel like home. I hope you developed that photo. If you ever need a listener or someone who enjoys bad coffee, I owe you a cup. Mason." Grace reread it 3 times. The message was simple, almost too polite, but something about it felt sincere. She typed a reply, then deleted it, then wrote again. "Thank you. I have not developed the photo yet, but maybe I will take you up on that coffee." She hovered her finger above the send button for a full minute before hitting it. That evening, as the sun fell behind the apartment blocks, her phone buzzed again. "Tomorrow at noon," Mason had written. "There is a small cafe near the library. You cannot miss it, it smells like cinnamon and bad decisions." Grace laughed for the first time in days. She typed, "You have convinced me. I will be there." The next day, the cafe was nearly empty. Old brick walls, crooked frames, and a chalkboard menu that looked older than she was. Mason was already there, seated near the window, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of him. He stood when she entered. "I was afraid you would not come," he said softly. "I almost did not," she admitted, pulling the strap of her camera off her shoulder. "But then I realized I needed somewhere to sit." He smiled, that same easy expression that had calmed her the night before. They talked for hours about books, music, and the strange comfort of being invisible in a crowd. He told her he worked in operations, helping manage logistics for a company that keeps things moving. She did not ask more. He did not offer more. When she left, the sky was drizzling again. Mason walked her to the corner and held out his umbrella. "Take it," he said. "I have another one." Grace shook her head. "It is fine. You will get wet." He smiled. "Then we will both get wet." For a moment, they stood there under the same umbrella, 2 strangers who were no longer strangers at all. She could feel her heart steady, as if the world had paused just long enough to remind her that kindness still existed. As she turned toward the bus stop, Grace caught her reflection in the cafe window, her hair damp, her smile small but real. She whispered to herself, maybe table 23 was not such a bad seat after all. The days that followed felt lighter, as if something had shifted in the air around Grace. She still worked her shifts at the bookstore, still counted the coins in her wallet before every grocery run, but she caught herself smiling more often. Every morning she brewed coffee and glanced at her phone, half expecting a new message from Mason, and most days, one arrived. Their emails were short, easy, like small postcards of life. "Rain ruined my tie again. Bookstore cats must have better benefits than I do. Next time you are picking the coffee place." Grace found herself rereading them when the world felt too gray. One Friday evening, Mason sent a message that made her pause. "There is a weekend street fair by the river. I could use a photographer. You interested?" She stared at the screen, fingers trembling. Her last paid gig had been months ago, a friend's engagement photo shoot that never got published. She typed back, "If you do not mind amateur mistakes." The reply came instantly. "Every masterpiece starts with one." The following afternoon was crisp and golden. Tents lined the boardwalk, filled with handmade jewelry, local art, and the smell of roasted almonds. Grace wore her thrifted denim jacket and slung her camera over her neck. When she spotted Mason waving from the lemonade stand, her pulse skipped. He was dressed casually, dark jeans, rolled sleeves, and that same quiet steadiness that made everything around him slow down. "Ready to make me look less awkward on film?" he teased. "Only if you promise not to blink this time," she said, lifting her camera. The first click of the shutter broke the ice. Then another, and another. Grace captured Mason handing a balloon to a child, laughing with a vendor, leaning against a wooden post as sunlight hit his face just right. Through the lens, she saw something new: kindness shaped by patience, confidence softened by gentleness. "Let me see," Mason said, stepping closer. Their shoulders brushed as he looked at the preview. "You make things look better than they are." Grace lowered the camera, meeting his eyes. "Maybe they already are better. You just never stopped long enough to notice." A silence settled between them, not awkward but warm. Mason cleared his throat. "There is a cafe 2 blocks from here. They make terrible scones but great tea. Want to test that theory?" They spent the rest of the afternoon in that small cafe with mismatched chairs and steaming mugs. Grace showed him her sketchbook filled with photography ideas. Mason listened closely, not with the polite nods of someone waiting to speak, but with the focus of someone who genuinely cared. When the light outside turned orange, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something shiny. "You lost this last time." It was the safety pin she had used at the wedding to fix his collar. Grace blinked, surprised. "You kept it?" "Of course," he said softly. "It saved me from looking ridiculous in front of 100 people. That deserves a place of honor." She laughed, shaking her head. "You are impossible." "Persistent," he corrected, his tone playful but gentle. "I think that is the word you are looking for." For the first time, Grace realized she was not nervous around him anymore. He had this way of grounding her, like an anchor she never knew she needed. Later, as they walked back toward the parking lot, the air turned cooler. Streetlights flickered on, and the sound of the river filled the quiet. Mason stopped and looked at her camera. "You should show your work, Grace. The world deserves to see how you see it." She shook her head quickly. "I do not even have a portfolio. Just random film rolls and failed shots." "Then start with one," he said. "Start with seat 23. Her heart caught at the memory, the lonely table, the noise, the moment he sat down. She nodded slowly. "Maybe someday." Before they parted, Mason glanced up at the sky. "Next Saturday, there is an open gallery downtown. I will send you the address. Think about coming. No pressure." Grace smiled. "You are terrible at the no pressure thing." He grinned. "I know." That night, she developed the photos in her tiny bathroom, turning it into a makeshift darkroom. Under the red glow of the lamp, the images slowly appeared her lens, capturing laughter, sunlight, and something unspoken between them. The final frame was from the fair's last hour. Mason standing by the river, hands in his pockets, looking at her like he already knew what she was thinking. Grace held the wet print in her hands, water dripping onto the sink. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy surface. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been too afraid to show the world how she saw beauty. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the window pane. She looked up and whispered, "Seat 23. Maybe that was where everything began." And somewhere across the city, Mason opened his own photo, a candid snapshot Grace had taken of him laughing mid-sentence. He smiled to himself, knowing he had found something rare in that crowded ballroom, a connection born not out of wealth or status, but out of a simple, ordinary seat by the kitchen. A week passed before Grace saw Mason again. She had almost convinced herself that their time together at the fair had been nothing more than a fleeting weekend, one of those rare, perfect days that life rarely repeats. But then his name appeared on her phone again. "Friday night, small art gallery downtown, 7 p.m. I am counting on you to bring that camera." Grace read the message twice, her heart tapping against her ribs. She typed a reply before she could overthink it. "I will be there." The evening arrived cold and bright. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement as Grace walked toward the old brick building that housed the Open Arts Gallery. Through the tall windows, she could see people mingling inside, men in dark suits, women in sleek dresses, the kind of crowd that usually made her feel invisible. She smoothed the thrift store dress she had borrowed again and whispered, "Just breathe." When she stepped in, the smell of wine and new paint filled the air. Her old camera hung from her neck, heavy like armor. Mason was near the center of the room, speaking to a group of guests. His posture was confident but calm, the same quiet energy that had drawn her in from the start. He noticed her almost instantly. His smile was small but genuine. "You came," he said. "I told you I would," she replied, trying to sound steady. "You said it was open to everyone." "It is," he said, "but I hoped you would walk through that door." They drifted toward the quieter side of the room, near a series of photographs framed along a white wall. The images showed city life reflections in puddles, faces on trains, moments that people usually missed. Grace studied them carefully. "Who took these?" "A friend," Mason said. He used to think his work was not worth showing. Grace turned toward him, ready to ask more, but before she could, a man with a microphone climbed onto the small stage near the front. The crowd hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer began, "please welcome our primary sponsor and guest of honor, Mr. Mason Reed, founder and CEO of Reed Logistics and the Reed Foundation." Applause filled the room. Grace froze. The words hit her like a sudden gust of cold air. CEO, founder, sponsor. It was as if every conversation they had shared replayed in reverse, each vague answer now forming a picture she had never imagined. Mason glanced at her, the warmth in his eyes replaced by something like apology. "Grace," he began, but she stepped back, shaking her head slightly. She could hear the rest of the speech echoing in the background, but the words blurred, the air felt thinner. She remembered him saying, "I work in operations. I keep things moving." She had thought it meant delivery trucks, not entire corporations. "I need some air," she whispered. She turned toward the exit, her heels clicking too loudly against the polished floor. Mason followed her to the hallway, away from the crowd and the cameras. "Grace, please," he said quietly. "Let me explain." She stopped, facing him. "You told me you worked in operations. You let me think you were just ordinary." "I never meant to lie," he said. "I wanted to know someone who did not care about the name on my business card." Her laugh was soft, but it cracked halfway through. "And you got exactly that. But now I feel like the fool who talked about rent and second-hand dresses to a man who probably owns half the buildings on this block." "That is not fair," he said gently. "I like that you talked about real things. I like that you were real." She took a step back. "Real? You met me under false pretenses, Mason. You sat at my table because you felt sorry for the girl sitting alone. Do not pretend it was something else." His voice broke slightly. "I sat down because I saw someone who looked just as out of place as I felt. I stayed because I wanted to." Grace blinked hard, trying to hold her composure. "You do not understand what it is like to have nothing, Mason. To count every dollar and still smile like you are fine." "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. "Money fixes problems, but it does not fill the silence when everyone wants something from you." She looked at him, torn between anger and disbelief. The hallway light cast shadows on his face, making him look both powerful and human, but she could not stay. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "I cannot do this right now." Without another word, she turned and walked into the night. Outside, the rain had started again, steady and cold. Grace did not take the umbrella he had once given her. She let the drops soak through her hair and down her back. On the sidewalk, she passed a poster taped to a lamppost advertising open art submissions. "Local photographers welcome." The words blurred behind tears and rain. When she reached her apartment, she placed her camera on the table and stared at it for a long time. The photo from table 23 still rested inside, undeveloped. She thought about throwing it away, but her fingers would not move. Instead, she sat down, closed her eyes, and whispered to the empty room, "You just wanted a seat. I just wanted to be seen." And somewhere across the city, Mason stood alone in that bright gallery. Surrounded by applause he no longer heard, holding the safety pin she had once given him. He turned it between his fingers, the small piece of metal glinting under the light, and realized that for the first time in his life, wealth could not fix the thing he feared most, losing something real before it even had a chance to begin. Days turned into weeks, and winter crept slowly across the city. Grace buried herself in work, sorting books and sipping cheap coffee in the quiet corners of the shop. Customers came and went, snow gathered on the window ledges, and life moved on at least. That was what she told herself. But every time the doorbell above the shop chimed, a part of her still expected to see Mason standing there. He never did. At night, she sat by the small heater in her apartment, developing photos she had taken before the gala. The film from table 23 remained untouched. It felt like a wound she was not ready to reopen. Yet something about the silence after the reveal haunted her. She missed his steady voice, his small jokes, the way he had listened. But mostly, she missed the version of herself she had been when she sat beside him, the one who had believed she belonged somewhere. One evening, her manager handed her a letter left at the counter. "Some man dropped this off earlier," he said. The envelope was plain, her name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a single note. "For your next project, Grace. The world needs to see what you see." Folded inside was a check from the Reed Foundation, enough to cover a small gallery rental. Her heart raced as she turned the paper over. No signature, just a postscript. "Please, do not let my mistake stop your story." Grace sat there for a long time staring at the check. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to reject anything that came from him. But another part, the quiet, hopeful part, whispered that maybe this was not pity. Maybe it was faith. The next morning she walked to the downtown gallery district. She stopped in front of a small space for rent, its windows dusty, its walls bare. The landlord was kind and curious when she explained her idea. a one-night exhibit featuring photos that captured the unnoticed corners of the city. He smiled and said, "Artists like you keep this neighborhood alive." Over the next 2 weeks, Grace worked harder than she ever had. She cleaned, painted, framed, and printed. Each photograph told a story of resilience: a street musician smiling through the cold, a child watching raindrops race down a window, a woman fixing her shoe in the subway mirror. Every image held a fragment of her heart, her loneliness, and her courage to begin again. When she was nearly finished, she reached for the last roll of undeveloped film, the one from the wedding night. Her hands trembled as she fed it into the developing tank. Under the red glow, the image slowly appeared. Table 23, 2 people side by side, caught mid-laughter. She traced her own reflection in the glossy surface and smiled. It was not a picture of a girl being rescued. It was a moment where she had chosen to show up, to stay open, even when she felt invisible. On the evening of the opening, snow drifted gently outside. A small crowd gathered: customers from the bookstore, her landlord, a few curious passers-by. Grace stood by the door, thanking each person as they entered. The walls glowed with soft light, her photographs lining every inch. Above the center display hung the piece she had titled Seat 23. She was adjusting a frame when the door opened again. The air changed. Grace looked up and froze. Mason stood there, a simple black coat over his suit, snowflakes melting in his hair. For a second, neither of them spoke. "I was not sure if I should come," he said finally, "but I needed to see what you created." Her voice was calm, but her heart pounded. "You helped make it happen." "I just gave you a check," he said softly. "You gave it meaning." They walked together through the gallery. He stopped in front of the photo from the wedding, the one where their laughter filled the frame. "I remember this," he said quietly. "It was the first time in months that I felt normal." Grace looked at him, eyes steady. "You could have told me who you were, Mason." "I wanted to," he admitted. "But I was afraid that once I did, everything real between us would disappear." "It did anyway," she said, her tone gentle but honest. He nodded, then reached into his pocket. In his hand was the small safety pin she had used that night. "I kept this," he said. "It reminded me that someone once cared enough to fix something small for me. I want you to have it back." Grace looked at the tiny object glinting in the light, then shook her head. "Keep it. Maybe it will remind you that being real is not something you need to hide." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then Mason glanced toward the crowd admiring her work and said, "You did this, Grace. You turned one empty seat into a story worth sharing." She smiled softly. "It was never about the seat, Mason. It was about finally believing I deserved to sit there." As he left that night, the snow outside thickened, blanketing the streets in white. Grace watched from the doorway, her heart calm. She knew their story was not finished, but it no longer depended on what he did next. For the first time, she felt whole, seen, not because someone had chosen to sit beside her, but because she had chosen to stand up for herself. Inside, the photo of Seat 23 shimmered under the lights, a memory of kindness, courage, and the quiet beginning of something that neither time nor distance could erase. Snow kept falling over the city that night, long after the gallery had closed. Grace walked home with her hands deep in her coat pockets, her mind full of the faces that had stopped to admire her work. For the first time, people had looked at her photos and seen more than pictures. They had seen stories, and through their eyes, she had begun to see herself differently too. The next morning, the world outside was wrapped in white. Grace brewed coffee and sat by the window, staring at the soft light spilling across her camera on the table. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "The board loved your exhibit. The foundation wants to feature your work in our spring program. Would you be open to discussing it?" There was no name, but she knew. Mason. Her first instinct was to delete the message, but instead she typed slowly, "If it is about business, I can meet. If it is about anything else, I am not ready." A reply came minutes later. "Business it is then? Noon tomorrow. Cafe by the library." When she walked into the cafe the next day, the smell of cinnamon and coffee felt like a déjà vu. Mason was already seated by the window, the same spot as before, the same careful calm in his eyes. He stood as she approached. "Grace," he said, "thank you for coming." "I came for the meeting," she answered softly, setting her bag down. He nodded. "The foundation wants to sponsor a community photography program. You would lead it, teaching young artists how to find beauty in ordinary places." Grace hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you already do it," he said, And because I want others to see what I saw, the night we met someone brave enough to sit alone and still look up. She looked down at the coffee mug between them, her reflection rippling on the surface. You really think people would listen to someone like me? I do, he said quietly. They already are. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the espresso machine and the soft chatter around them filled the silence. Then Grace asked, "Is this truly just business?" Mason's eyes met hers. "It started that way," he said. "But that night at the wedding changed everything. I do not expect forgiveness. I just hope we can build something honest, whatever that becomes." Grace took a slow breath. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, the kind that does not demand but simply waits. "If we work together," she said, "there will have to be boundaries, clear ones." "Of course," he said immediately. "All professional, all respect." She almost smiled. "You say that like you are rehearsing it." He laughed quietly. "Maybe I am." For the next hour they talked about plans, the budget, the workshops, the venues. Yet under the surface of every word was something unspoken, something that lingered between trust and hesitation. When they finally stood to leave, Mason handed her an envelope. "For the first round of materials," he said. "No strings attached." Outside, the snow had melted into soft rain. They shared the same umbrella again, just like the first time. As they waited for the traffic light to change, Grace said quietly, "You know, for someone who claims to understand logistics, you are remarkably bad at timing." Mason smiled. "Maybe some things are not meant to run on a schedule." Her laugh was small but real. "Maybe." At the corner, they stopped. She turned to him and said, "I will take the job, but this time I am doing it my way. No hidden names, no secrets." He nodded. "Deal." They shook hands, simple and firm, the way two equals do. But when their palms touched, a quiet understanding passed between them, something fragile. Not quite forgiveness, but the beginning of it. That night, Grace hung the Seat 23 photo above her desk. Beneath it, she pinned the Reed Foundation letter and the note he had written months ago. "The world needs to see what you see." As she turned off the light, she looked once more at the image that had started it all, two people sitting side by side, not knowing that a single ordinary moment would alter the course of their lives. Grace whispered to the empty room, "Maybe second chances are not given. Maybe they are chosen." Outside, the rain softened into mist, washing the city clean again. And somewhere, Mason stood on his balcony looking out over the skyline, holding the safety pin in his palm, hoping that someday soon the distance between them would not feel quite so far. Spring arrived quietly, and with it came new beginnings. Grace found herself busier than she had ever been. The Reed Foundation photography program had taken off faster than anyone expected. Twice a week, she met with groups of young artists in a bright studio downtown, teaching them how to capture stories through the lens. It was honest work, and for the first time in her life, Grace felt that she was building something that mattered. Mason kept his promise. Their partnership remained professional, at least on the surface. He attended every monthly review, listened to her ideas, and let her lead. But sometimes during those long meetings, Grace would catch him watching her with quiet pride. And though she tried to ignore it, her heart always noticed. One Thursday afternoon, as she packed up after class, her student Mia approached her with a shy smile. "Miss Turner, are you coming to the gala next week?" Grace looked up, surprised. "What gala?" "The Reed Foundation's annual celebration," Mia said. "They said you were on the guest list. You have to go. You are the face of the program now." Grace felt her stomach tighten. Another gala, another room full of powerful people and polite smiles. For a moment, she saw herself back at table 23, the girl with no date, no friends, sitting near the kitchen. But that was a lifetime ago. She had changed. "I will think about it," she said softly, and Mia grinned before running off. The following week, the invitation arrived. Reed Foundation Annual Charity Gala, honoring local artists and community leaders. Her name was printed beneath the foundation's gold crest. She stared at it for a long time before laying it on her desk. The night of the event came faster than she expected. Grace wore a simple navy dress borrowed from a colleague, elegant but not extravagant. When she entered the ballroom, memories flooded back: the sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft glow of chandeliers. But this time, something was different. She was not a guest on the margins anymore. She was part of the story. As she moved through the crowd, familiar faces greeted her warmly. "You are the photographer from the youth program," someone said. "Your student's exhibit was wonderful." Grace smiled. her nerves slowly fading. She felt seen for her work, not for where she sat. Then she heard a voice behind her. "You found the right table this time." She turned. Mason stood a few feet away, dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression calm but uncertain. "I was not sure if you would come," he added. "I almost did not," she said. "But my students convinced me." "They were right to," he said. "You deserve to be here." They found themselves at a small table near the stage, the kind that offered just enough privacy for conversation. As the evening unfolded, speeches echoed through the hall, stories of change, of hope, of rebuilding. When Mason's name was called to speak, he rose and walked to the podium. He began with gratitude, thanking donors and volunteers. Then, near the end, his tone changed. "There is one person I want to thank in particular," he said, glancing toward her. "Someone who reminded me that real success is not measured by wealth or reputation, but by the courage to sit down beside a stranger and truly see them." The room went quiet. Grace's chest tightened as the crowd turned to look at her. Mason continued. "Her name is Grace Turner. She turned an empty seat into a story that has inspired hundreds of young artists. Tonight, we celebrate her." Applause filled the ballroom. Grace's eyes shimmered, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. Mason stepped down from the stage and walked toward her, stopping just beside the table where she sat, the place where it had all begun. "I meant every word," he said quietly. Grace looked up at him. "You did not have to." "I did," he said, "because sometimes the only way to make things right is to tell the truth out loud." She smiled through tears. "You have a habit of making speeches in rooms full of people. And you have a habit of forgiving me when I least deserve it," he replied. The music swelled as the band began to play. Mason extended his hand. "Would you give me one more chance to sit beside you?" Grace hesitated only for a second before taking his hand. "Only if you promise not to hide behind fancy titles again." "Deal," he said. As they moved to the center of the room, the lights softened, and the music slowed. Around them, laughter and conversation faded into a gentle hum. For the first time since that rainy wedding night, Grace felt completely at ease. The world had come full circle, same kind of ballroom, same soft glow, but a completely different woman standing in its light. When the song ended, Mason leaned closer and whispered, "Thank you for letting me find my seat again." Grace smiled. "It was never about the seat, Mason. It was about finally sitting beside someone who wanted to stay." And as the applause rose once more around them, she realized that sometimes fate does not repeat itself to test you. It repeats itself to prove you have grown strong enough to choose differently. The days after the gala felt unreal. Photos of the event appeared online, Grace standing beside her students, Mason speaking at the podium, the audience clapping. Reporters called her the voice behind the lens, but Grace knew the real story was quieter than headlines could tell. It was about second chances, about choosing kindness when pride would have been easier. She spent the next few weeks finishing the youth photography program. Every day, the students arrived with their cameras and stories, their laughter filling the studio. Grace felt proud watching them grow, seeing the world through their eyes. Yet, behind the joy, there was something unspoken between her and Mason. They saw each other often through work, exchanged polite words, but both were careful, measured, as if neither wanted to break the fragile balance they had finally found. One afternoon, after the last class of the season, Grace walked alone to the riverfront, the same spot where she had once photographed Mason months ago. The air was soft, the sun lowering over the skyline. She pulled out her camera, lifted it, and looked through the viewfinder. For the first time, she turned the lens on herself, pressing the shutter with a steady hand. It was not vanity. It was closure. When she lowered the camera, a voice came from behind her. "You finally turned it around." Grace turned and saw Mason walking toward her, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You found me again," she said, smiling. "Habit," he replied, handing her a cup. "Every story you tell seems to lead back here." They stood side by side, watching the water move under the fading light. The air carried the sound of distant traffic and laughter from the nearby park. "I am leaving for a while," Mason said quietly. "The foundation is opening a new branch on the West Coast. I will be overseeing it for a few months." Grace nodded, her fingers tightening around the cup. "That sounds like a good opportunity." "It is," he said, "but it will not feel right if I go without saying this." He paused, looking at her. "You changed the way I see everything, Grace. You reminded me what it means to show up, not to impress, but to be real. That is something I will never forget." She met his gaze, calm but tender. You taught me the same. Maybe that is what we were supposed to do for each other." He smiled. Maybe. They walked together along the river, the same rhythm in their steps. When they reached the corner where their paths would part, Mason stopped. "If you ever need a seat saved," he said softly, "I will always keep one open." Grace laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Just promise me one thing, Mason. Wherever you go next, sit beside someone new. Keep choosing kindness." He nodded, his eyes warm. "I will, but some seats," he said, "are never truly empty." She watched him go, the outline of his figure fading into the soft orange of the evening. For a long moment she stood there, letting the wind lift her hair, feeling the peace that comes only when you know a story has reached its right ending. Later that night, she developed the photo she had taken at the river. In it, she stood alone, smiling faintly at the horizon. Behind her, the sunlight touched the edge of the water soft, golden, endless. Grace placed it beside the old photograph of seat 23. "Two frames, two moments, one beginning and one closure," she whispered. "Thank you for sitting down that night." And somewhere far away, Mason looked out over another coastline, the same photo in his hand, smiling at the memory that had changed both their lives. A full year passed before Grace saw Mason again. The city had changed, with the season's summer heat melting into autumn leaves, and autumn fading into a winter gentler than the last. Her photography program had grown beyond what she ever imagined. The students she had mentored now led their own workshops, and her name appeared quietly in local art magazines. Yet even with success, there were moments when she caught herself glancing at an empty chair across from her in the cafe, remembering his quiet laughter. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, steady, and clean. "Grace, I am back in the city for a few days. There is something I want to show you. If you can, meet me tomorrow at 5. The address is written below. M." She almost hesitated, but curiosity won. The next day she followed the address to a small neighborhood on the edge of downtown. The building she found was old but charming, its front windows covered with brown paper. Through the glass, she saw Mason standing inside, hammer in hand, adjusting a wooden sign above the door. When he noticed her, his smile was quiet, almost shy. "It is not finished yet," he said as she stepped closer, "but I wanted you to be the first to see it." Grace looked up. The sign read, "Seat 23 Studio, Community Arts and Photography." Her breath caught. Inside, the space was bright and simple, white walls, wooden tables, and strings of warm lights. On one wall hung photographs taken by the youth program students, their signatures scrawled in bright ink. Another wall was still empty, waiting. Mason watched her take it all in. "The foundation helped fund it, but it was your idea that inspired it. A place for people who never thought they belonged anywhere to sit, to create, to be seen." Grace turned to him, her voice soft. "You did this?" "We did," he said. "I just found the space. You gave it purpose." For a long moment she could not speak. She ran her fingers over the wooden counter, feeling the texture of possibility. "It is perfect," she whispered. Mason nodded. "There is one more thing." He reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table between them. It was the small safety pin she had given him at the wedding, the same one he had carried all this time, now polished and framed under glass. Beneath it was a simple plaque that read, "Kindness is the strongest link." Grace smiled, tears blurring her vision. "You kept it all this time." "I told you," he said softly. "Some seats are never empty." She laughed through her tears. "Then I guess we better start filling them with stories, with art, with people who need a place." He smiled, that same quiet warmth she had once seen under the glow of wedding lights. Exactly. The two of them stood in the center of the new studio, surrounded by the soft hum of evening traffic outside. Light poured in through the window, reflecting off the glass frame on the wall. Grace picked up her camera and lifted it. "Smile," she said. Mason looked up, amused. "For what?" "For proof," she answered, "that sometimes one wrong seat can lead you exactly where you were meant to be." The shutter clicked, freezing the moment forever, their faces lit by golden light. The studio behind them, and the sign above the door whispering the story that had begun with loneliness, but ended with belonging. And as the picture developed later that night, Grace wrote one line beneath it, "Seat 23, where kindness sat down first, and love quietly followed."